please give us your full name, your date of birth, and where you were born?
Barbara Ellen Benard. I was born December 8th, 1946 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
And your son, Brent, can you tell us his birthday and where he was born?
Yes, Brent was born to Barbara and Bill Adams on April 29th, 1965 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Other than your son, do you have any other military veterans that are in your family?
My father was a military veteran.
And what branch was he in?
He was in the Army in World War II.
Oh, okay. Do you know where he was in World War II by chance?
He was in the European theater, Germany, Belgium, France.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about the event that would lead to Brent's combat experience?
I'm sorry, what do you mean exactly by his combat
like
experience?
When 9/11 occurred, or at which point in time that you realized that a significant political event occurred that might lead to your son's service in the military and put him in danger?
Okay, well, first of all, with him being in the Army National Guard, I never dreamed that he was going to be deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. And my first time to know that he was going to be deployed was December of 2004. He knew for a while that his unit was going to be deployed, but he didn't tell us right away. He told his sister, Melissa, and when he came home for his visit for Christmas, that's when he broke the news to us that he would be leaving for Camp Shelby, Mississippi in January for 6 months of training, and then he was going to be heading to Ramadi, Iraq.
And can you tell us why Brent chose to serve his country in the military?
Brent was always interested in the military. From a young child, he used to play Army with his friends, and they'd had BB guns, and they were never supposed to shoot above the waist, but one time Brent jumped up and his friend had just shot and hit him in the mouth, and he ended up losing a tooth by that. He was always interested in National Geographic books on the Civil War and on World War II. Liked to play a lot of the war games. He was just a stand-up guy and wanted to do something for his country. And it was also a way to help pay for college costs. But he decided to stay in and make a career of it, and was going to, when he came back from Iraq, he would have maybe a year or 18 months left, and then he was going to retire out to spend more time with his son, Daniel.
And what did Brent do as an occupation back home?
He worked in the engineering department with Sprint and out in Pittsburgh, and would go out. He had a degree in regional planning and would go out where they're going to place towers and check out the communications and that kind of work.
And I understand he was also active in his church. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. He had called me maybe a year, maybe 2 years before he was deployed, and said, "Mom," he said, "I just want you to know that," he said, I think God's calling me to be president of the church council of our church. The church is dying, and there's not many young people, and I feel that it's something I need to do, that I can make a contribution to try to make the church grow." So he was the youngest member elected to the church council.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Brent, his personality, hobbies, likes, dislikes, as he was growing up as a boy?
He liked playing street hockey. He liked playing Army and War. He liked music. His music taste ranged from symphony orchestra music to the Dead Milkmen, and I don't even know what groups they are, but you know, modern music. He was very curious as a child, wanted to know the answers to everything, always asking why. His love of books was, I mean, I would read to him till I couldn't read anymore. I would be hoarse from talking. He loved the outdoors, backpacking and hiking, and used to tell me that he felt closest to God when he was out in the wilderness. In fact, his love of nature and his curiosity and his sense of humor and his heart were the makeup of Brent. He had a big heart, was willing to do anything to help anyone. His sense of duty and responsibility were always there from a young age.
And I understand he was married and had a son. Can you tell us about his wife and son?
He married Marilyn Cooter in 1999 out in Pittsburgh, and in 2001, his son Daniel was born, and Daniel was the love of his life. I mean, you couldn't find a more involved father than Brent. When he brought Daniel home from the hospital, he asked me to come out for a week and spend with them so he would know what to do. He goes, "Mom, don't they come with a manual?" I said, "No, they don't come with a manual." And so I helped him give Daniel his first bath, and that was something, a time that him and Daniel always shared together was bath time. And Daniel was the love of his life. They had a boys' night out, no women allowed. One time, Brent was working on something and must have hit his thumb or something, said a swear word. Daniel looked at him, he was only 3 or 4, and he says, "Dad, I think you need a beer." And he would take Daniel, he was a very avid sports lover too. Pittsburgh Steelers, Philadelphia Flyers, Penn State football. And from the time Daniel was a baby, he would go to Pirates football games with them strapped in one of those little carriers in the front. Daniel would run around when he was 2 years old hollering, "Hit that ball."
What goes through a mother's mind when she realizes that her son's going to actually go into combat theater? Can you tell us about?
I was terrified. I did not want him to go. I said, "Can't you get out of this?" He said, "Mom," he goes, "I signed a contract on the dotted line. It's my duty, it's my responsibility. If my men are going, I'm going." I'm like, "Well, if you think this is what you have to do," and I guess I said, "But I'm terrified. I'm terrified that you're going to be, especially in Ramadi, because in 2005 that was the insurgent stronghold." And I was just terrified of knowing that he was going to be there.
Were you there for his, when he was deployed? Tell us about the last time you saw him before he was deployed.
Okay, the last time I saw him was he came home for his 10-day leave before he was being shipped over to Ramadi. And so we drove out to Pittsburgh, and his wife Marilyn had a pig roast out there. And so we had a final breakfast together, and at that breakfast I was just hugging him, and I didn't want to let go, because in the back of my mind I was feeling like this is going to be the last time I'm ever going to see him. And I thought, no, don't even think that, because if you think that, it may come true. And we just hugged for the longest time, and I just clung on to him. And I just didn't want to let go.
Can you tell us how you kept in contact with him when he was in theater?
We would get phone calls and emails, not as often as I would like, but he would call home more often to speak to Marilyn and Daniel. And we have a trailer at the beach, so he forgot which numbers were which sometimes, and when he had a chance to call, there was a whole bunch of Marines that were there, and when they finally left, it was an easier time to make phone calls. So it was either email or phone calls back and forth, but he was working 12, 14-hour days, so he didn't have a lot of time left. You know, he would send me a short email saying, you know, "I'm really tired. It's 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I've been up, you know, and working since 8 o'clock this morning, so it's going to be quick."
Can you tell us what unit your son was assigned to and what his responsibilities were, his day-to-day responsibilities overseas?
Yes, he was with the 2nd Battalion Combat Team, 28th Infantry Division, and he was the Sergeant First Class in charge of the motor pool. So their job was to keep the vehicles running smoothly and to do supply runs from base to base.
Did he enjoy that type of work?
He did. In fact, he didn't have to be out on making the runs, but that's what he wanted to do. And he was the type of soldier that he wouldn't ask his men to do anything that he wouldn't do. And he had this unique leadership ability to draw his men in with him and participate with them, you know, get their trust. And so that's what he did. So he liked to take runs outside when his men had worked too many hours.
Did he talk about his guys in any letters or anything like that?
Not a whole lot about them, but I did find out that there was a vehicle that a Daniel Leitner had been killed in. It was an explosion, and Brent, they didn't clean the vehicle out very well, and he had to get it ready for the next day, and he was extremely upset when he had to clean out that vehicle. I mean, and him and his men together actually on base made a shower area and everything, and the senior officers would come up there, and he was so proud of his men in the maintenance department for doing all that.
How long was his tour supposed to be in theater?
His tour in theater was supposed to be for a year. And he was killed 5 months into the tour.
Can you tell us about how you found out?
I had heard from Brent. My last contact with him was the day before he was killed. It was a telephone conversation, and it was 3:30 our time, and he called and, you know, hi Mom, and, you know, how you doing? And I'm like, you know, I'm really worried about you. And for some reason, in the course of our conversation, I became very upset, and I was actually sobbing at the end of the conversation. I didn't quite understand why at the time, but I said to him, please be careful, and I love you. And he said, I love you too, Mom. And that was the last time I heard those words from him. The next day, we got a call about 7 o'clock in the evening, my husband and I. We were at Toys R Us with a grandson picking out a birthday present for him, and my cell phone rang, and it was Brent's wife, Marilyn. And Marilyn said, Barb. I said, oh, hi, Marilyn. We're out here at Toys R Us. And she said, is Jack there? I said, sure. So I handed my husband the phone, and I walked away with my grandson. Well, she explained to my husband on the phone right then and there that Brent had been killed. So he said he fell back against this railing and said, well, I can't talk to you right now, and I can't tell Barb right now because we're in a public place here. So we get my grandson's toy, head to the checkout, take him back home, and we're at my stepdaughter's house, and she's talking to me, and all of a sudden my husband gets very agitated, and he said, we got to go. I have something I have to do. And I just looking at him like, holy cow. And just about that time, we're getting our coats on, getting ready to leave, and my cell phone rings. And it's my daughter on the phone. And she's crying hysterically, and all she had to say was, Mom, Brent. And I don't remember, but they said that I screamed and threw the phone down. And I just kept saying, no, no, no. So my husband rushed over, and he said, I'm sorry, I wanted to tell you, but I was going to tell you as soon as we got out in the car. So we drove home. My daughter said, Mom, the soldiers have already been at the house You weren't home, so they went to Dad's house, but they're on their way to your house. So I already knew before the two soldiers showed up at the door. But it's still a life-altering experience when you see those two soldiers standing at your door to say those words that devastate a parent, that we regret to inform you. And the two soldiers had known Brent. They weren't good friends, but the one had known him from school, and the other one had gone to school with my daughter. So they could hardly look at us. They just kept looking down at the ground, and I imagine that has to be one of the hardest jobs in the world, is to tell someone that their child has died. From that point, relatives were being called, our pastor was called. Everyone showed up at the house, and I'm just in a daze. It's like you're on autopilot, and you just go through motions, and you don't really know what's happening. And, you know, to hear that news that just shatters your whole life and actually makes a physical pain in your heart is the worst tragedy that can ever befall a parent. It's not supposed to happen. Your children aren't supposed to go before you. Then we left to go to Pittsburgh. Thank you. For the funeral, we were out in Pittsburgh and waiting for the body to come back. At that time in 2005, you were not allowed to go to Dover to receive the remains of the soldiers. So he was flown into the Pittsburgh airport after a phone call that I made to the White House. They had called the funeral director out in Westview, Pennsylvania, where Brent, Marilyn, and Daniel lived, and said that he would be there on a certain date. So the funeral director had put the article in the paper about when the funeral was going to be and everything, and then we got a call saying that the body was going to be delayed possibly up to 48 hours. And the casualty officer, Maryland's casualty officer, said, look, there's not a whole lot I can do, but you as private citizens can do, you know, whatever you want. So a friend of my son's was there, Ron, and he worked at the Pentagon, and I said, Ron, can you get me the number for the White House? And he said, sure. So I called the White House. I was surprised they answered the phone, White House, and I was like, wow. So I called the White House, and they switched me over to the Secretary of the Army, and I'm crying, you know, I'm telling him what all is going on. The body's should have been here, and we have people trying to make arrangements. The funeral arrangements have already been in the paper. So I said, if we don't hear back from you within an hour, I'm going to call a press conference. And 20 minutes later, the phone rang and said that Brent's body would be coming into the Pittsburgh airport that night at 9 p.m. When the funeral was over, we drove back home, and we had a memorial service at our church for Brent, for his friends and the family that couldn't travel all the way out to Pittsburgh.
If there is just one thing that you would like your great-grandchildren to know about Brent and his service to his country, what would it be?
I want you to know that Brent was a hero, And the definition of a hero is a man with principles. Brent had principles. He was a leader. He put duty and honor first to his country and his men. And he had a very kind heart and a smile as big as you can imagine, which was always dubbed by his men in the service as the Adam's smile.
Due to Brent's death, you became involved in an organization. Can you tell us what that organization is and what it is that you do?
Yes. On the death of a child in the military, you are always a Gold Star mother, but there is an organization called American Gold Star Mothers, and that was formed back in 1928 after World War I. And so I joined American Gold Star Mothers. Our mission statement is to perpetuate the memories of our sons and daughters, to serve our veterans, and to help each other. And so through serving in this organization, it has given me some peace to know that I can help the veterans who do come home, who do make it home, and their families, because serving in the military is not just it's not just the person who's in the military, it's the whole family that's involved. The whole family serves. So we try to do fundraising things to give back to our veterans, to look at legislation that may help the veterans, like I said, to help each other, further this thing for the Honor and Remember flag, to honor and remember all those who have served in the military since the Civil War forward. It has given me great peace to be able to do that, to keep busy, to take that negative that happened in my life and to make something positive out of it.
And how often is it you guys meet?
Well, the organization is comprised of chapters. The chapters come under departments, and then all the departments roll up to national. So my chapter of American Gold Star Mothers meets once a month. But I serve on the National Executive Board of American Gold Star Mothers, and I'm the National Treasurer, so I am in D.C. at least once a month.
I can imagine that obviously when you have a new member, the organization's
Yeah.
almost funny that you have a new member. It's tragic that you have a new member, if that makes sense.
It's an organization that no one ever wants to join. But, you know, once we are, the camaraderie between the mothers and the unspoken understanding of the trials and tribulations and the journey that that mother is going to have to take. We share those things and we listen to their stories, you know, because you always want to make sure that your son or daughter is never forgotten for the service that they've given to this country. And so, you know, you want to talk about them. You want to tell people about them because they lived, they were here. So it's like a sisterhood of Gold Star Mothers, because no one else can understand unless they've experienced the loss of a child. It's just not something that you would ever know until it happens to you.
Obviously, the pain never goes away, but when you talk to other mothers, do you find it therapeutic? Or does it open up old wounds?
Well, I mean, it's not like we all sit around and cry all the time. We have fun times. We, you know, talk about our kids, and sometimes the memories are happy, sometimes they're not. Something can trigger the tears. I mean, it could be a song, it could be something that someone said. But we just try to console the newer mothers and, you know, listen to their story.
You mentioned that everybody wants to memorialize their child for their service, and that's part of the reason we're doing this interview today. What else would you like to tell us about Brent's life, or anything that's on your mind about Brent?
he was such a happy child and such a curious child. The questions he would ask me, I would look at him and it's like, I can't believe that this child is so intelligent that he, you know, would even think to ask me these questions. And his heart was just, he had a heart of gold. I mean, he believed in his moral principles, and there was no way that he was going to compromise that. I mean, his beliefs and his sense of duty and service to country were always present.
Well, on behalf of the American Wartime Museum, we thank Brent for his service, and we thank you for your service, what you're doing with the Gold Star Mothers. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.